My name is Maribel Vasquez. I was 34 years old, and 2 days after I buried my husband, I believed grief was the worst thing my family could do to me. I was wrong. The funeral home smelled like lilies and carpet cleaner, that flat chemical sweetness that never fully covers what's underneath it. I remember standing near the guest book, still in the black dress I'd bought 3 days earlier because I owned nothing appropriate for burying a 36-year-old man, when my mother pulled me by the elbow into the hallway by the restrooms. Her grip was tight enough to leave 4 small marks I found later, in the shower, and didn't tell anyone about. "You need to stop crying like that in front of people," she said. Not gently. Not like comfort. Like correction. My father was behind her, arms crossed, wearing the navy suit he wore to every serious occasion, funerals and depositions alike, because he was a claims adjuster and had learned a long time ago that Navy reads is trustworthy. "Some of us think," he said, "that this family has had bad luck since you married into it." I didn't understand the sentence at first. I thought grief had made him strange. Then my mother said the words plainly, the way she said everything plainly, because subtlety had never been a tool she reached for. "Daniel is the 3rd person close to this family to die in 4 years. Your uncle. Your cousin's husband. Now this. People notice patterns, Maribel." I stood in that hallway with mascara drying stiff on my cheeks and listened to my own mother tell me, 48 hours after I'd watched a casket lowered into red Georgia clay, that I was bad luck. That my husband's death was a pattern. That I was, in some unspoken but very audible way, the common denominator. Before I tell you what happened next, and before I tell you what my father was already holding in a manila folder tucked under his arm, the thing he hadn't shown me yet, tell me, what time is it where you're watching this from? Where are you watching from? What's the weather like there right now? I always wonder how far these stories travel, whose kitchen table they end up on, whose late-night drive. My father set the folder down on the small table beside the guest book, next to a framed photo of Daniel from our wedding, the 2 of us laughing at something off camera I could no longer remember. He opened it without asking. "This is the paperwork for the house," he said. "And this is what's happening with the life insurance." I hadn't even called the insurance company yet. Daniel had been dead 6 days. I hadn't slept more than 90 consecutive minutes since the hospital called. And my father was standing in a funeral home hallway with photocopied documents about a payout I hadn't filed for, telling me, calmly, that given the family's judgment about my luck, it might be wiser if the funds were managed by someone more stable. Him. Or my brother Esteban, who had declared bankruptcy twice and currently owed our mother $11,000 he referred to as a loan. That was the moment. Not the grief. The grief I could have survived alone in a room with the door shut. It was watching my own parents step over my husband's fresh grave to reach for what he'd left behind, and calling it concern for my well-being. I said nothing. I took the folder from the table, put it under my arm, and walked back into the viewing room where 40 people were pretending not to have heard raised voices near the bathroom. I need to go back further than that hallway, though, because none of it makes sense without the years underneath it. My parents, Ramon and Dolores Vasquez, raised 3 children in a house in Lawrenceville, Georgia, that my father bought in 1994 with money he'd inherited from his own father, a fact he mentioned at least once a month for the rest of his life, as if the mortgage itself owed him gratitude. I was the middle child. My older sister, Yolanda, was the golden one, valedictorian, married a dentist, produced 2 grandchildren on schedule. My younger brother, Esteban, was the favored one, in the specific way that failing sons are sometimes favored, endlessly forgiven, endlessly funded. I was neither. I was, in my mother's words, the difficult one, which mostly meant I asked questions at dinner that nobody wanted answered. When I met Daniel Reyes at 26, working the same accounting firm in Atlanta, my mother's first comment wasn't congratulations. It was, "He doesn't come from anything, does he?" Daniel's mother had passed when he was 19. His father was, by his own quiet account, not someone I keep in my life. The person who raised Daniel, really raised him, was his godfather, his padrino, a man named Arturo Delgado, a retired federal magistrate who'd known Daniel's mother since childhood and who stepped in after she died the way some men step into a debt they consider sacred rather than optional. Maribel. I met Arturo exactly twice before the wedding. Once at a dinner where he asked me 40 minutes of quiet, specific questions about my work, my family, my values, and said almost nothing about himself. Once at the wedding itself, where he gave a toast so short, 11 sentences, Daniel counted them later, laughing, that my mother called it cold. What she meant was that it hadn't performed warmth the way Southern toasts were supposed to. What I understood, watching Arturo's eyes the whole 11 sentences, was that he was not a man who wasted words, and that when he did speak, he meant every syllable of it. He gave Daniel and me a card at the reception. Inside, in small, deliberate handwriting, he'd written one line: "If either of you is ever in real trouble, call me before you call anyone else." I put that card in a drawer and forgot about it for 6 years. I didn't know then that Arturo Delgado had also been the executor named, quietly, discreetly, in a document Daniel had signed 4 years into our marriage, a document my parents didn't know existed, and one that was about to matter more than anything my father was holding in that manila folder. The week after the funeral, my mother started calling twice a day. Not to check on me. To ask about next steps. "Have you talked to the insurance company yet?" she asked on a Tuesday, while I was still finding Daniel's hairs on the pillowcase and couldn't decide whether to wash it or keep it exactly as it was. "Not yet, Mom. You should let your father handle the calls. Grief makes people say things wrong on the phone. Numbers, dates. He does this for a living." I told her I could handle my own husband's death, thank you, and she sighed in the specific way she'd sighed at me since I was 9 years old, the sigh that meant I was being difficult again. 3 days later, Esteban showed up at my house unannounced with a 6-pack of beer he didn't offer me any of and a laptop he set up at my kitchen table like he lived there. "I know this is a hard time," he said, in a voice I recognized from every time he'd asked our parents for money, "but I've been looking into some investment options. Real estate mostly. Rental properties in Gwinnett County are undervalued right now. I think Daniel would have wanted the money to actually work for you instead of just sitting there." Daniel had been dead 9 days. Esteban had a spreadsheet. I asked him to leave. He looked genuinely wounded, the way he always did when a plan didn't land, like the problem was my ingratitude rather than his timing. That Friday, my father called and asked me to come to the house for dinner, as a family, to talk things through properly. I almost didn't go. I went because some old, stupid part of me still wanted my mother to hug me and say the thing a mother is supposed to say when her daughter is 34 and widowed. She did not say that thing. What she said, over pot roast, was, "Your father spoke to Frank Ostrowski. He handles estate matters for half the church. He says with no children involved, and given how young the marriage was, there might be a case for family members to petition for guardianship of the estate assets, just until you're in a clearer state of mind." I put my fork down. Guardianship. Of me. Of the money, Maribel. Not of you. Don't be dramatic. My father slid a piece of paper across the table. It wasn't a petition. Not yet. It was a retainer agreement with Ostrowski's letterhead, dated 4 days earlier, with a $5,000 initial fee already listed as paid, I would later learn, from the $11,000 Esteban still owed my mother, quietly forgiven in exchange for helping with the paperwork. They had started building a legal case to control my late husband's life insurance and estate before I had even filed the claim. I sat at that table with the smell of pot roast and rosemary thick in the air, a smell I have not been able to stand since, and I understood fully, for the first time, that my family did not see a grieving daughter across that table. They saw an amount. "You think I'm bad luck," I said quietly, "or you think I'm an idiot? Which is it?" My mother's face didn't even flinch. "We think you're vulnerable right now. There's a difference." I left without finishing dinner. In the car, I called the only person who had ever, in 8 years, told me the truth without an angle attached to it. Arturo picked up on the second ring. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral, where he'd stood at the back of the room the whole service, not performing grief, just present, the way he was present for everything. "Maribel," he said. "Tell me what's happening." I told him about the hallway, about Esteban's spreadsheet, about the retainer agreement with Frank Ostrowski's name at the top. There was a long pause on the line, long enough that I asked if he was still there. "I'm here," he said. "I'm writing some things down." "Before you say anything else, do you still have that card I gave you at the wedding?" I did. It was in the same kitchen drawer, under a rubber-banded stack of take-out menus we'd never thrown away. "Good," he said. "I need you to understand something, and I need you to sit down first if you're not already sitting." I was standing in my driveway, engine still running, and I sat down right there on the concrete, phone pressed hard to my ear. "For years ago," Arturo said, "Daniel asked me to help him set something up. Not because he expected to die at 36. Because he'd watched, for years, the way your family talked about money in front of you. He told me once, these are close to his exact words, if anything ever happens to me, I don't want my wife alone in a room with my in-laws and a lawyer they picked." My hands had gone cold on the phone. "What did he do, Arturo?" "He restructured the life insurance beneficiary designation outside of any will your parents could contest through probate. He also asked me to serve as trustee on a secondary account, a smaller one, specifically earmarked so that no claim of guardianship or incapacity could touch the primary payout. It's airtight, Maribel. I checked it myself, twice, because I don't do sloppy work for people I love." "Why didn't he tell me?" Arturo's voice, when he answered, was gentler than I'd ever heard it. "Because he didn't want you carrying the plan for his own death. He wanted you to just be his wife. He wanted me to carry it instead." I sat on that cold concrete driveway and cried the first clean tears I'd cried since the hospital, not grief exactly, or not only grief. Something closer to relief and something closer to fury, both at once, either one canceling the other out. "Send me copies of everything your father has given you," Arturo said. "The retainer agreement. Anything with Ostrowski's name on it. Do not sign a single document until I've seen it. And Maribel, don't tell them yet what you know. Let them keep building. People like this build their own case against themselves if you give them enough rope and enough silence." I didn't fully understand what he meant by that yet. I would, within 3 weeks, understand it completely. 10 days later, Arturo called and asked me to meet him at his office in Decatur, a modest space above a dry cleaner that smelled faintly of pressed cotton and old coffee. He had a legal pad in front of him, filled with his small, deliberate handwriting, the same hand that had written 11 sentences in a wedding card 6 years earlier. "I want to walk you through what I found," he said. "Some of it is going to be hard to hear." The first thing was Frank Ostrowski himself. Arturo had pulled the Georgia Bar's public disciplinary records, a 5-minute search anyone could have done, and found that Ostrowski had been sanctioned twice in the past 9 years, once for commingling client funds, once for failing to disclose a conflict of interest in an estate dispute involving an elderly client in Rockdale County. He was not, as my father had described him at that dinner table, simply the man who handles estate matters for half the church. He was a man with a pattern of exactly the kind of behavior he was now being paid to help my father attempt. "That's coincidence," I said, wanting it to be coincidence. "Maybe," Arturo said. "Keep listening." The second thing was the money. Arturo had, with my written authorization, requested a formal accounting of the $11,000 debt my mother had forgiven for Esteban. The timeline was exact. Esteban had borrowed the money in March 18 months earlier, for a truck down payment. On the 4th of the month, 4 days after my father's dinner table conversation, my mother texted Esteban, a text Esteban, drunk and careless, had forwarded to a group chat that included a cousin who was, fortunately for me, still fond of Daniel and appalled enough to forward it to Arturo once he called around asking quiet questions. The text read, "Debt is cleared. Your father needs you to say you'll help watch over Maribel's finances if it comes up with the lawyer. Just say yes if he asks. Debt forgiveness in exchange for testimony." That was the plain language of it, whether or not anyone in my family would have used those words out loud. The third thing was worse. Arturo had, through a paralegal he trusted, obtained a copy of the draft guardianship petition Ostrowski had prepared, not filed yet, but drafted, dated, ready. It cited, as evidence of my vulnerable emotional state, 3 specific incidents: my crying at the funeral home, a comment I'd made to my mother about not being able to sleep, and, this was the one that made my stomach drop, a claim that I had a documented history of poor financial judgment, supported by a single incident from 9 years earlier, before I even met Daniel, when I'd co-signed a car loan for a college boyfriend who defaulted on it. 9 years. A 25-year-old's bad ex-boyfriend decision, dredged up and reframed as a pattern, to argue that a 34-year-old CPA, because I was a CPA, I want to be clear, I processed estate valuations for a living, couldn't be trusted with her own late husband's money. "They're not just hoping I'm fragile," I said. "They're building a file." "They've been building it since the hallway at the funeral home," Arturo said. "Possibly before." That last part turned out to be true in a way I didn't expect. Arturo had one more document. A voicemail, actually, left on Daniel's cell phone 11 days before he died. Daniel had been having chest pains for 3 weeks that he'd dismissed as stress, something none of us caught in time, something I will carry for the rest of my life. A voicemail from my father that Daniel had never deleted and never mentioned to me. Arturo played it. My father's voice, calm, businesslike, completely unaware he was being recorded onto a phone that would outlive its owner. "Daniel, it's Ramon. I wanted to ask, off the record, man to man, if something ever happened to you, God forbid, has Maribel got herself a will sorted, or would that all default to probate? I ask because Dolores worries. You know how she is. Anyway. Call me back." 11 days before he died. My father had been asking my husband, off the record, what would happen to the money if Daniel died, 3 weeks before Daniel even knew, consciously, that something was wrong with his heart. I sat in that small office above the dry cleaner and felt something in me go very quiet and very still, the way water goes still right before it's about to move. "I don't have a clean answer for what to feel right now," I told Arturo. "I want to believe there's an innocent version of that voicemail. I keep trying to build one in my head, and it keeps falling apart." "You don't owe anyone a clean feeling," Arturo said. "You owe yourself an accurate one." That was the moment I stopped hoping there was a version of my family that would surprise me. And it was the moment I decided, not in anger, not that night, but over the following week, carefully, what I was going to do about it. I was not going to scream at my mother across a dinner table. I was not going to post anything online. I was not going to let Esteban's spreadsheet or my father's voicemail turn into a family war fought in group chats and slammed doors, the kind of war that burns everyone and settles nothing. I called Arturo back 4 days later, on a Sunday morning, coffee going cold in front of me. "I want to do this the right way," I told him. "Documented. Legal. I want it to be undeniable, in a room, in front of witnesses, so nobody in this family can ever again tell themselves a softer version of what they did." There was a pause on the line, and then Arturo said the words that, looking back, set the whole next month in motion. "Then let's build the room." Building the room took 3 weeks. Arturo brought in a colleague, a family law attorney named Priya Chandrasekaran, who specialized in estate disputes and had, in her words, seen every version of this story except the ones where the family gets caught this cleanly. Between the 3 of us, we assembled what Priya called a documentary record, not accusations, not feelings, just dates and papers and numbers that could not be argued with. We had the retainer agreement, dated 4 days after the funeral, $5,000 paid from a debt forgiven in exchange for cooperation. We had the forwarded text message about that debt. We had the draft guardianship petition, unfiled but fully drafted, citing a 9-year-old car loan as evidence of poor judgment. We had the voicemail, 11 days before Daniel's death, asking what would happen to the money if he died. And we had, thanks to a records request Priya filed with the county, confirmation that Frank Ostrowski had never actually filed anything with the court, meaning the entire guardianship threat had been, up to that point, theater, designed to frighten me into signing over control before I understood I had any other option. Priya also pulled the actual estate documents Daniel had filed with Arturo 4 years earlier. Everything was airtight, exactly as Arturo had promised. The primary life insurance payout, $420,000, named me as sole beneficiary through a designation that bypassed probate entirely. A secondary trust, $60,000, with Arturo as trustee, structured specifically so no claim of incapacity could freeze it. My family had spent 3 weeks building a legal threat against a wall that had already been reinforced years before they ever tried to push on it. You have 2 options, Priya told me, laying it out plainly the way I'd come to appreciate from both her and Arturo. You can quietly send a cease and desist to Ostrowski, end this in a letter, and never speak to your parents again if that's what you want. Or you can do what you told Arturo you wanted, put it in a room, with witnesses, and let them hear it back. I thought about my mother's sigh. My father's navy suit. Esteban's spreadsheet on my kitchen table 9 days after Daniel died. I thought about the word bad luck, and how easily it had come out of my mother's mouth in a hallway that still smelled like lilies. The room, I said. We chose my sister Yolanda's 40th birthday dinner. Not because I wanted to ruin it, I genuinely didn't, and told Yolanda as much beforehand, privately, the only member of my family I warned in advance, because unlike our parents and Esteban, Yolanda had called me every single day since the funeral asking nothing of me at all. She deserved to know what was coming into her own dining room. She sat with the folder Priya prepared for 20 minutes at her kitchen table, went very pale, and then said, "Do it at the dinner. They need to hear it from you, not read about it in a letter." 14 people came to that dinner. My parents. Esteban and his girlfriend. Yolanda, her husband, their 2 kids. Cousins, an aunt. Arturo came too, at my invitation, sitting quietly near the end of the table the way he'd sat at the back of the funeral home. Dinner went normally for the first 40 minutes. My mother asked me, in front of everyone, whether I'd made a decision about the guardianship conversation, phrased casually, like she was asking about a catering choice. I have, I said. I brought some paperwork I think everyone should see. I set the folder in the center of the table, next to the birthday cake nobody had cut yet. On June the 9th, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, 11 days before Daniel died, my father left him a voicemail asking, off the record, what would happen to my finances if Daniel passed away. Daniel never got the chance to tell me about that call. I found it because his godfather found it. The table went silent in the specific way a room goes silent when something true and unwelcome enters it. My father's face didn't move, but his hand, resting near his wine glass, went still. For days after Daniel's funeral, I continued, my parents signed a $5,000 retainer agreement with Frank Ostrowski to pursue guardianship over my late husband's estate. That $5,000 came from an $11,000 debt Esteban owed our mother, forgiven the same week, in exchange for Esteban agreeing to support the petition if it was filed. That is not what happened, my mother said, too quickly, her voice pitched higher than usual. I have the text message, I said. I did not raise my voice. I placed a single printed page on the table, face up, and let it sit there. I also have the draft petition itself. It cites, as evidence I'm unfit, a car loan I co-signed for a boyfriend when I was 25 years old. 9 years before I even met Daniel. Esteban's girlfriend was looking at him now, not at me. My aunt had put her fork down. Yolanda's husband had gone very quiet, the careful quiet of a man deciding not to be the one who spoke next. Mom, I said, you told me 2 days after I buried my husband that I was bad luck. That this family has a pattern of death around me. I've thought about that sentence every day since. And I think I finally understand what it actually was. It wasn't grief talking. It was cover. It's easier to call someone bad luck than to admit you're circling what she just inherited. You have no right, my father started. I have every right, I said. I'm the widow. You made me the subject of a legal filing before you brought me a casserole. Arturo spoke for the first time all evening, his voice quiet, even, carrying the specific weight of a man who had spent 30 years in courtrooms and had learned exactly how much volume the truth actually requires. Ramon, he said, I'd like you to know that the guardianship petition was never going to succeed. Daniel restructured his estate 4 years ago specifically to prevent this exact scenario. You spent $5,000 and 3 weeks trying to open a door that was already welded shut. I only wish he'd told me it was because of a fear this specific. I would have liked to tell him he was right to have it. My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. We were trying to protect this family's assets. No, I said. You were trying to protect your access to them. There's a difference, and I think, somewhere under all of it, you already know that. Nobody finished the birthday cake that night. Frank Ostrowski was reported to the Georgia State Bar the following week, both for the pattern of prior sanctions Arturo had uncovered and for drafting a guardianship petition built substantially on a 9-year-old, legally irrelevant car loan. Conduct Priya characterized in her complaint as a bad faith filing intended to intimidate rather than a good faith legal claim. 6 months later, the bar suspended his license for 18 months and ordered him to repay the $5,000 retainer in full, plus interest, directly to my parents, who never saw a cent of it back from the guardianship scheme they'd paid for. My father was not criminally charged, nothing he'd done crossed into anything a prosecutor would touch. Priya was clear about that from the start, but the county family court, once Priya filed a protective motion on my behalf simply to close the door permanently, entered a formal record stating there was no legal basis for any guardianship claim over my estate, ever. A public filing that will exist in that courthouse for as long as records are kept. My father's name is on it. So is Ostrowski's. So is the case number anyone in our family could look up, at any time, for the rest of their lives. Esteban's girlfriend left him 9 weeks after that dinner. I don't know all of what was said between them, but I know she told Yolanda she couldn't unhear the part about the $11,000 traded for testimony. Esteban texted me once, in October, a long message about how he'd just been trying to help Mom and Dad, which I read twice and did not answer. My mother called 4 times in the 2 months after the dinner. I let 3 go to voicemail. On the 4th, I picked up, mostly because I was tired of the silence weighing more than the conversation would. She didn't apologize, not really. What she offered was closer to "I hope you understand we were scared," which is not the same sentence, and I told her so, gently, without cruelty. I told her I needed distance, not forever, but for now, and that the distance wasn't punishment. It was maintenance. It was the only way I knew how to keep what was left of myself intact. I want to be honest about something, because I think the honest part is more useful than the tidy part. I did not feel triumphant walking out of Yolanda's house that night. I felt hollowed out, like something necessary had been removed along with something toxic, and I couldn't fully separate the two in the moment. Grief doesn't wait politely for you to finish being angry at your family. It shows up in the same week, sometimes the same hour, and you're left holding both at once with no clean way to set either one down. 10 months later, I still keep Daniel's watch on my nightstand, and some mornings I pick it up before I remember I don't need to wind it for anyone anymore. That's the smell of cedar from his old dresser, still faint in that drawer, the one thing in the house I haven't been able to clear out and don't think I'm required to. Arturo and I have dinner once a month now, at a small Cuban place near his office, and he never once, in all these months, has said "I told you so" about any of it, though he'd have earned the right to. Yolanda and I are closer than we've ever been. My parents and I speak occasionally, carefully, at holidays, in rooms with other people in them. I don't know if that will ever change into something warmer. I've stopped needing it to, on any particular schedule. What I've come to believe, slowly, without any single dramatic moment of clarity, is that forgiveness is personal. I can forgive my father the voicemail, forgive my mother the word bad luck, in the quiet privacy of my own thinking, and some days I nearly do. But access is a different question entirely. Access has to be earned back, in specific, demonstrated ways, over time, and it is not owed to anyone simply because they share your blood or attended your wedding or sat 2 seats down at a funeral home wearing navy. So I'll leave you with this, because I think it's the question underneath everything I've just told you. If the people who are supposed to protect you started circling instead, the moment you were too tired to protect yourself, how long would you wait to notice? And once you did notice, would you have the strength to build the room, put the truth on the table, and let it speak for itself? Thank you so much for watching. Everything in this video is fictional, written purely for entertainment and reflection, and any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. If it stayed with you at all, I hope it's because somewhere in it is this: healing rarely looks like a courtroom victory or a birthday dinner gone quiet. It looks like ordinary mornings afterward, where you finally get to decide, on your own terms, who still gets to sit at your table.